This is part 2 of the lecture for week 7, and in this part we're going to talk about sustainable food production, the ecology of sustainable farming, and then make a few comparison of how much of food production is in agriculture, and then also how we can meet the requirements of both agriculture and ecology. So for sustainable food production, one of the big issues is food security. So you might think sustainability over into the long-term future, but it's also just very immediate food security for this year, for the next several years. And in order to meet that security, we have to have a certain amount of food that's reliably produced, that's for sure. But there's also the types of food that that are available and provide the nutrition, because you can have malnourishment from just getting the wrong type of food. And then there's the economics of food production that comes in as the sustainability equation, which is how much fuel is going to be used, how much petrochemicals is fertilizer, what are the land ownership issues. And then there's a couple of things about risk, which is what are the risks in the distribution system, and is there sensitivity to disruption from climate or other natural factors. And again, in the United States, these things are fairly well covered. We have a robust system of delivery and workarounds for low water years, not total droughts, and distribution. But in other countries that don't have the national infrastructure, a hurricane or an earthquake can make a huge distribution in the national food distribution system, and this can create a lot of food insecurity, which leads to destabilization, can lead to real social and economic problems. So food security and sustainability is a political and economic and social problem, as well as an environmental problem. So one of the ways we can try to produce food more sustainably is with less impact on the environment and certainly less degradation, is by using artisan agriculture. And a good example of that is this project called Polyface Farm, and Polyface Farm is run by Joel Salatin. You might, if you read any Michael Pollan's work, you've on this, you've heard some of his activities. And what he does is he has pastures that have a wide array of grasses and herbs growing there. The beef eats that, then the chickens run around and scratch it up, and then there's pigs that are involved. So he has all of these different animal faces involved in harvesting the solar energy that's captured by these plants and putting them into food. So these for this week, there's several videos that deal with Polyface Farm and actually how he does this salad bar, how the chickens work, all this sort of thing. And so you're going to be watching those, and pay attention, because there's going to be a crux question on this. And one of the things you'll find is that Joe Salatin is very opinionated and has a lot of ideas on his own, and he likes to talk to people about it. So it's an intriguing study, and should be very interesting. Now, other examples of that in the Willamette Valley, there's Xena Farms, and then right in Portland there's Tryon Creek Community that has again a urban agriculture that grows plants, has goats, has a variety of and chickens, has a variety of different animals and plants that they use to provide food for their community. Okay, now I'm going to come back to this part about local food production in just a second, but I want to talk about how you match the farm process to the land. And the way it works is generally this cycle here. Let's just start at the top, but you have to start anywhere. The herbivores eat the plants, and then the herbivores grow. So like cows, chickens, pigs. So they use the energy from the plants. Then the herbivores walk around and they poop and pee all over the place, but because they're scattered around on the pasture, this is distributed. It's not just all like in one place where it piles up and degrades the land. And in fact, in Polyface Farm, they have the chickens follow the cattle around, so the chickens scratch up the cow pies and break them up, and helps get that ready for soil decomposition. The other thing they do is they move the cows, really, because the dairy cows. They move them around on the field, move them around and create so they're never in one place for very long. And this is one of the major ways that they use pretty high technology on the polyface farms, is by setting up electric fences and moving these cattle with four-wheelers and pasture to pasture all the time, and just keep them sort of on the move, so they're never in one place very long. Okay, then the feces and urine go into the soil, and soil microbes regenerate that. And again, this requires that you don't compact the soil. You have to have the right aeration and right root system in the soil for this all to work. And then those plants grow even better because they've been fertilized, and they take up the organic material, and they grow root systems, and they capture solar energy. So this cycle of animals eating plants, eliminating, but having a healthy soil to regenerate those nutrients from the animal excreta is very important. And then the other part is to do this with just the right number of cows on the landscape. If you have too many, they trample it down. If you have too few, the grass is going to grow up and not be utilized as effectively. So back to this idea about sustainable food production. One of the ways that you see in Portland area is, and it's growing in other areas around the country, is that local food production, even in the urban and in the suburban landscape, is providing food for people. And one example of this is community-supported agriculture, and this is where people in the community buy a subscription to get a certain amount of vegetables and fruit produce over the year, and they pay the farm, and then the farm delivers that, or they have to go pick it up. But anyway, the farm provides them with a certain amount of food per week. And we see this as very, you see it in urban areas, but also just on the border of Portland and the urban growth boundary here. It works really well because we've reserved areas for farm production that are very close to the city. So these sorts of projects like community-supported agriculture or small artisan farms can really flourish in an area where they have almost immediate contact, or very short range contact, to a large population center. So again, that's one of the advantages of the urban growth boundary that we have in Oregon. Another example is to use the commons, that is parks and sort of old lots, to do that. In Portland we have a program that's called Urban Edibles, and when you just see their web page, you can see they have, sort of using Google Map technology, and people out there, they see, oh well, there's a bunch of trees in this lot, and they've got apples on them, so let's go trim these trees and make the apples do better. Or within a park, there might be some berries or some fruit-bearing trees. And so this is again an example of using technology, in this case a community database and social networking software, to help provide food and getting it right out of the local area. Philadelphia has a similar project with their orchard project, where they identify trees that are in parks and need to be pruned and harvested. And Seattle fruit tree harvest, very similar idea, been very successful at harvesting fruit and getting it to people that need that food. Now, Portland's also known for having a lot of chickens, and these, again, it's said we have the highest per capita chicken. Certainly, I don't know of any other city that's had TV shows made about their chicken, about the number of chickens and what they're doing. But we have a lot of chickens in Portland, and again, this is another type of urban agriculture where scraps of food, sort of recycled, end up being as either food for the chickens, and then to produce eggs. So there's a lot of this going on, and this aspect of urban agriculture is bringing that right to people's yards. So they're actually producing food, and in times of food stress or the food security, having a flock of chicken that's producing eggs is a very, very valuable commodity. Now, one of the reasons, again, this works is in Portland area and throughout the state of Oregon, we have urban growth boundaries, which help protect farmland for the farm uses, and then develop corridors for high density living along major traffic ways. Okay, another aspect of sustainability is the amount of energy and food and local development, tying all those together. So we saw last week how degradation of farmland could decrease the value of the natural capital in an area, and that natural capital is valuable. Farmland is a type of that. But more than that, just based on economics, if you have local farms and you spend that money locally, you can see that locally owned businesses keep $68 out of every $100 local, and $32 of that leaves the local economy. And local farms that provide food for restaurants, these are really good examples of these local businesses. Whereas if you have a business that's non-locally owned and has central office some other place, about $57 leaves the community. Now that may not leave the people that live in the community. You might be stockholders in those companies, or you might run a company that has deliveries or accounting services from one of these national firms. But it leaves the local economy, and therefore, when you have a downturn in the local economy, this sort of economy, the money that is there stays there. This sort of economy, a lot of money gets shipped out. So local farms providing local food are a way to keep are a feature of a sustainable local economy. And a study done by the EcoTrust showed that a $66,000 grant to a local school to try to source their food for their cafeteria locally resulted in $226,000 being transferred around in the community. This is the multiplier effect, and it was so that this money was stayed in the local community and created that much benefit. So again, local food has an economic benefit. It has a lower carbon footprint because it's locally produced, and it has and it can be beneficial for avoiding or for increasing food security, rather. Okay, let's just look at a couple other things, and one of them is this agriculture versus food production, because there's a lot of agriculture that is not being used for food. So everything up to this point in the lecture, I've been talking about food. But the largest crop in the United States by area is lawns, and these are highly watered. There's also ornamentals, such as the little shrubs and everything. This is a big industry in Oregon. There's fiber plantations for growing pulp trees, and sometimes it overlaps with forestry, but they're run almost like like a farm rather than a forest. We have tobacco and cannabis, and I don't really know too much about cannabis, what the health effects are, but I know that tobacco is bad for you, and just to grow tobacco, have a lot of acreage in tobacco is bad for society, bad for the health of individuals. It's just a financial thing. So that's not, everything we said before about farms. Well, if you have high water use, high land use, and high petrochemicals, and you're creating tobacco with that investment and having an economic impact, well, that's just sort of bad all around. We also have the production of illegal and harmful drugs that are plants. So that's again part of the bad thing. And then there's I'm going to talk about this just below, but using biological sources to produce ethanol or other biofuel stock, like to make plastics or that sort of stuff. And that runs into this idea of the food versus fuel controversy. So biofuels and the use of biodiesel, ethanol, those are directly competing with food production. Now, maybe we don't need that much food, so maybe it's not competition for the actual quantity, but it uses water, the production of biofuels, use water, use land, and then the environmental choices we're making are based on economic incentives and policies at the big scale. So to produce biofuels, there's tax credits, there's carbon incentives, there's rules that require a certain amount of fuel to be biodiesel. Like in Oregon, we have a certain 5% of biodiesel and 10% ethanol in the gasoline during certain seasons. So all of these have an impact on how agriculture is, what crops they're growing and how much of it they're devoting to corn, to other fuel stocks. Okay, it's not all bad news though, because when agriculture is done right and when land use planning comes together, you can have benefits of agriculture to ecology. So a good example of this is this study that was done about land use planning in Oregon. And the purpose of the study was to find efficient land use planning that both promoted biodiversity and economic development. And they looked at 9 land use categories, from farming to urban development to forest to conservation, meaning sort of just wild areas. And they looked at landscape connectivity to understand what the impact. So you can have a farm next to a conservation area, and that's better than having, a urban development surrounding, heavy urbanized area surrounding conservation area, that sort of concept. And sort of skipping to the results of the project, it was done throughout the Willamette Valley, which stretched from Portland all the way to South Eugene, and it's this part of Oregon that you can see in this little map here. And what they calculated was they did utility calculations for different scenarios and mixtures of land, and those were on 2 criteria. One was the expected number of species on this y-axis, and the other is billions of dollars in economic output on the x-axis. And so all of these different variations of land use have the same overall utility because of the number of species and the number of land use. So these are the maximum you can get maximum you can get in any of these dimensions. So so up here, if you want to just have the maximum number of species, 257 species, you can see there'd be a lot of conservation areas and forest areas and very little of this red, which is heavily urbanized. And then over here, if you want to have the maximum generation of economic development, it's a lot of the urban areas and the sort of suburban developments, these sorts of things, the whole nature of and this is farming, the whole nature of that Willamette Valley looks quite a bit different. Okay, so you can see this sort of gradual change into more and more of this conservation and forestry land. But here's the point. Right now, the Willamette Valley is really in this place down here. And we could increase, just by having different combination of land use. Like in this case, we could increase the number of expected species by going just up like this, and you can see this one compared to this. This actually has more rural residential. It has the little gray is the urban growth boundary, but you could actually have, without sacrificing economic development at all, you could move up in the number of species actually by having more rural residential. And conversely, if you're here and you wanted to just keep that number of species, that 240 species or whatever it is right here, is just fine with you. You want to move out this direction, you can move out here and have much more managed forests and create more. This blue is actually managed forests. You could have more managed forests and still more cities and everything, and have the same number of expected species but with almost twice the economic development. So you see this, where you put things, the organization on the landscape is very important. You want to have farms, and if you have managed forestry and you have conservation areas, and these are all next to each other, they can actually have a synergistic effect. All right, well, I want you to pay attention to the reading, and this week there's several videos that explain the polyface farms, for example. So just go ahead and get started on that.